Today we're discussing all the variants of the Primaris Gladiator tank, the new main battle line gun platform from Codex Space Marines. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. In today's video we're turning our attention to the Primaris Gladiator, the new and very scary gun platform from Codex Space Marines, which we now have the full rules for. In the video we're going to go over each variant, all of their rules, discuss any Wargear options, combos and synergies, and how I would field them on the tabletop. So let's see what these blistering gun platforms can do. So the Primaris Gladiator builds 3 different variants, each of which has its own datasheet in Codex Space Marines. We have the Primaris Gladiator Valiant, the Gladiator Lancer, and the Gladiator Reaper. They all have their own datasheet, so if you wanted with a rule of 3, you could field up to 9 of them should you really want to go mad. At the time of recording, the kit isn't actually out from Games Workshop yet, but I'm sure it'll be along before very long. Here we have the first one for the Gladiator Valiant. This is the close range anti-tank version of the tank. It's 13 power and 250 points. The Gladiators have a fairly respectable main battle tank profile. They've got a 10-inch move, weapon skill 6+, ballistic skill 3+, strength 7, toughness 8, 12 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 8 and a 3+ save. The Valiant sports 2 multi-melter sponsons and it's armed with a twin las talon on its turret. Multi-melters have got the upgraded profile going into 9th, they're 24-inch range heavy 2, and if you're within melter range then you get d6 plus 2 damage rather than the standard d6. That twin las talon will be putting out heavy 4 shots with strength 9, AP -3 and damage d6. So this little monster is going to be kicking out 8 very strong anti-tank shots at 24-inch range. All the Gladiator variants can take 3 optional extras. They can take an Iron Hail Heavy Stubber for 5 points. These are now heavy 4 shots, strength 4, AP -1, damage 1, and personally I think they're very worth it for 5 points. They can also take an Icarus Rocket Pod, again for 5 points. Those ones are D3 shots, strength 7, AP -1 and 2 damage, and you get +1 to hit for shooting at aircraft. They no longer have any penalty for shooting down at ground targets. Again for 5 points, it seems like a very respectable upgrade on the firepower. If you're already sinking 250 points into this, then I personally don't really see any reason not to go for the extra 10 points of these 2 very decent options. Finally, you have the option of taking auto launchers, which are an additional 5 points, and these are an interesting little upgrade from the new Codex Space Marines that allow you to give the vehicle the smokescreen keyword, which allows you to, for a stratagem, give them a tank a -1 to hit when it's targeted. Say your opponent decides to declare 4 las cannons worth of shooting at it, then you can use the smokescreen stratagem, and those auto launchers will make it -1 to hit for the rest of the phase. It is a very powerful ability, but I'd only take it if you were genuinely thinking about spending the command points on it, otherwise it's just going to be wasted points. Personally I'd consider one of these just a bit more if you only had one Gladiator rather than multiple, as then you don't run the risk of your opponent just switching fire to the one that doesn't have -1 to hit. In terms of special rules, it has Angels of Death, which will give you your combat doctrines and shock assault. Not that combat doctrines matter all that much, getting an extra AP -1 on top of already excellent AP. They also have Hover Tank, meaning that distances are measured from the hull. Though it is interesting to note that this and the other hover tanks in the Primaris arsenal no longer have the fly keyword. You are going to have to move them around terrain rather than through terrain now. Finally, they explode much in the way of normal vehicles. On a 6, then units within 6 inches suffer D3 mortal wounds. In terms of keywords, aside from lacking fly, they do have the repulsor field keyword, which allows them access to the 1 command point grav wave stratagem, which again is excellent and we'll get onto. And it's important to note that they don't have the core keyword at all, meaning they're not going to be benefiting from things like lieutenant and captain buffs. Moving on to the next tank, we have the Gladiator Reaper, which is the anti-infantry variant of the Gladiator. It's got exactly the same profile and just switches out the Wargear. This one will set you back 12 power level or a mighty 230 points, so a little bit cheaper than the tank counting bruiser of the Valiant. The primary weapon for this one is a twin heavy onslaught Gatling cannon, which is a 30-inch range now, heavy 24 shots, strength 6, AP -1 and damage 1. That thing is going to leave a mark on literally whatever it shoots at, particularly when it's in the Devastator doctrine at AP -2. It supplements this with 2 Tempest bolters, which is a slightly weird new variant of the bolter, somewhere between a Storm bolter and a Hurricane bolter. These ones are 30-inch range, rapid fire 4 weapons with strength 4, AP -1 and damage 1. Rapid fire 4 and having 2 of them means that this tank will actually have a whopping 40 shots when it's within 15-inch range of an enemy infantry unit. And of course when you move into tactical doctrine, the Tempest bolters will very much like that. Again, you can take the Icarus Pod and Iron Hail Heavy Stubber, which will put you up to an average of 45 shots out of the tank at close range. And again you have the option of those auto launchers. Generally, if you want to blow up tanks, then go for the Valiant, and if you want to melt infantry, then you can go for the Gladiator Reaper. Finally, we come on to the third variant of the Gladiator, which is the Lancer, and this guy's 11 power level or 200 points. This one's designed to be a bit more of a sit back and shoot type tank, with a Lancer laser destroyer, which is 72-inch range, heavy 2, strength 10, AP -3, and damage D3 plus 3, so an average of 5. Furthermore, it has a Quillon optics, which means that you add 1 to the attack's hit roll when you're shooting with the Lancer laser destroyer. For sponsons, this thing is armed with just a couple of small ones. It's got the option of either 2 storm bolters or 2 frag storm grenade launchers, and it now doesn't cost you any extra to equip one over the other. Now, that main gun's profile does sound very scary, but I will bear in mind that it's only 2 shots, and it does mean that compared with the Valiant, this thing has a far lower anti-tank potential compared with that. And it's also massively weaker against any sort of heavy infantry, because the Gladiator Valiant has a mighty 8 shots, where this one only has 2 with decent strength and AP. It is significantly cheaper though, and can afford to be much further away, so out of the 3 I'd say that this one's by far the most survivable. They're all reasonably tough at toughness 8 and 12 wounds, but with that high of a points cost price tag, compared with most of the Space Marine arsenal, they're significantly less survivable on a point for point basis. For example, Guard Leman Russ tank commanders are considered relatively pricey. They have the exact same defensive profile, and you can field one with the Demolisher cannon for less than any of these. So talking about the tanks as a whole then, for Wargear I would typically take the Icarus rocket pod and the Iron Hail heavy stubber. I think over the course of most games it is going to add up to enough significant kills. They're just very good value for the amount of damage that you get out of 10 extra points. The auto launchers are a bit more take or leave, better if you have just one tank, as of course you can only smokescreen 1 per turn anyway. Might be good if you're going with one of the shorter range variants, as you're likely to be throwing that into the fray, so it's going to attract a lot of attention, and even if you can just force your opponent to waste a lot more damage on it, then that could well be worth 5 points and 1 command point. In terms of a little bit of expected damage output, assuming no other buffs or no combat doctrines or anything, the Lancer will average you around about 4 or 5 wounds on a toughness 7 vehicle per turn, obviously very swingy as to whether or not it actually gets the wounds through. And in general I'd be tempted to take the Storm Bolters as sponsons, as I think that the extra range is going to be a bit more useful than the slight increase at damage at 18-inch range. For the Reaper, when it's firing at 30 inches, it'll average around about 13 dead Orc boys, so some decent anti-infantry work happening there, or around about 7 wounds on toughness 4 Space Marines, and that's not counting any Iron Hail heavy stubbers or Icarus rocket pods that you might have tacked onto the tank. A few of these will chew through infantry units in the midfield in really short order, though I would bear in mind that having that many shots on one gun can sort of partly be a bit of a disadvantage, because you do have to plough all 24 shots into one target, which means that it's not very good for finishing off depleted units, for example. Finally, for the mathematical damage prize, I'd have to give it to the Valiant. It's 250 points, and even with no other buffs and outside melter range, this fearsome little tank will average 11 wounds on your standard toughness 7 vehicle, so it should kill them more often than not, particularly if you can spare a command reroll for one of its damage results. Of course, in melter range, when you're getting d6 plus 2 damage, that's only going to get better. In terms of combos and synergies for the tank, there are plenty of chapters that have some good synergy with it. Ultramarines would allow them to fall back and shoot, although they can do the same with this new Grav Pulse stratagem, and I think the Ultramarines redeployment stratagem could be really useful with these guys, allowing you to flex them whether or not you're putting them forward and aggressively if you're going first, or if you're hiding them behind cover if you're going second. Iron Hands generally have great synergy with vehicles. 6+ feel no pain and slower degrading is no bad thing at all. Plus you've got lots of extra synergy with healing them, and a couple of psychic buffs that can make them more accurate. Not bad at all when buffs for vehicles are few and far between now. Raven Guard can give them light cover greater than 18-inch range. Salamanders will be particularly helpful for a failed wound reroll per turn, which could be potentially very good for the Lancer or the Valiant, and they also have that stratagem for +1 to their wound rolls, which honestly would be excellent on any of them. It could actually be really fun on the Reaper, where you'll be wounding Space Marines on 2s, or even things like Imperial Knights you'll be wounding on 4s with that 24-shot gun. There's also the very reliable Salamander's psychic powers for Fire Shield for -1 to hit, and Drakeskin for +1 toughness. Imperial Fists for ignoring cover is never going to be a bad thing on gun platforms, and Crimson Fists with their chap's tactic of getting +1 to hit against anything with 5 or more models in the unit could be really good on the Reaper. That thing would be the absolute bane of hordes, hitting on 2s with 40 shots. Finally, Dark Angels can be very good with buffing gunline units like this, now that if you stand still you get +1 to hit. If you could put a Reaper or a Valiant down on the front line and keep it still for a turn, then hitting on 2s is going to be very nice indeed. It could combo well with their unique Devastator Doctrine for first turn as well, to get a little bit of extra range on them. In terms of characters from the core Codex Space Marines, not that many will buff them now. Two ones of note though are Tech Marines. You can heal them D3 wounds per turn, which when the tanks are quite so pricey in the first place is generally going to be a decent investment, and Tech Marines also have the ability to give a vehicle +1 to hit for a turn. Again, could be really useful on the Reaper or the Valiant, though less so for the Lancer as it's already got 3+ to hit. Librarians also have that Psychic Fortress spell, which has been reconfigured to give all chapter units a 5+ invul save when they're within 6 inches of him, and seeing as these guys have no invul whatsoever, that sounds like a great idea to me. If I was running an advancing trio of these, I would really consider a Librarian along for this spell. In terms of stratagems, there aren't all that many in the new Codex Space Marine book for these, though there are more that have a bit more freedom with them in the supplement books. From the core book, we have Armour of Contempt to shrug off some mortal wounds on a 5+. Smokescreen, the one to trigger those auto launchers, which means that when you're targeted you can automatically get -1 to hit, and the excellent Grav Pulse stratagem, which you can use either when your opponent tries to charge you to hit them with a -2 to charge, which has become a stratagem rather than an innate ability of the unit, or perhaps even more usefully to spoil your opponent's day, you can use it after your tank's been locked up in combat, and it allows you to fall back and shoot with no penalty to your hit rolls. Really useful for the more close range variants, as it means that even if you get locked up in combat, you'll still be able to fall back and shoot at exactly what you want. Finally, I'd also consider a command reroll for the Lancers to wound roll, as it's got a potential of damage 5 against hard targets, so it's going to be a very high yield one for command rerolling, and the same will go with the Valiant's multi-melters at close range. So how would I use these guys in game then? Firstly, out of the choice between the tanks, you can probably tell by now I'm a little bit more of a fan of the Reaper and the Valiant compared with the Lancer. I'm just really not sure that the Lancer deals enough damage to be worth its price tag. 40k really seems to reward things that get stuck into the middle of the board and deal high damage early, rather than sit back and shoot and deal a small amount of damage all game. In deployment, you can think about strategic reserving them if it makes sense to for 2 command points. Typically I generally wouldn't, and I'd rather try and hide them if I was worried about going second, though it could be an option if you absolutely want to guarantee their damage dealing potential. Having a turn off the board and spending 2 command points though is a pretty high opportunity cost. Otherwise I'd be trying to hide them out of line of sight turn 1 and then move them to get them into line of sight with that decent 10-inch movement, and if your opponent has things that are going to be annoying and try and get into close combat, I would certainly think about screening them well, though they do have that get out of jail free card with Grav Pulse if they need it, though it does cost 1 command point. The Reaper and Valiant, I'd want to consider what targets they can reach turn 1, so they're likely going to be wanting to be fairly close to the front of the deployment zone, where the Lancer's pretty happy just sat back with as good a line of sight as you can give it on the battlefield, blinking away at hard targets. If you've got any character buffs such as Librarians or Tech Marines, then naturally these guys would be good to hang out next to them. When shooting, I typically think about firing these guys fairly early in the shooting phase. They've got really big powerful weapons that could swing wildly one way or the other, so let them start early in your army and take out some fresh targets while using the rest of your small units to mop up a bit seems like a good idea to me. I generally want to be hovering the Valiant and Reaper around about 24 or 30 inch range away from the enemy, and if at all possible to try and take out their targets while also hiding from any strength 8 or 9 weapons. If they get charged, I'd certainly remember the Grav Wave stratagem. If your opponent has attempted a slightly long charge on one of these guys, then it could be really powerful, though I guess you could weigh it up against Overwatch, particularly on that Reaper, which is quite likely to get a fair few hits. In terms of competitors within the Space Marine army, unfortunately I really don't think that the Lancer's stats really stack up against similar units. Point for point, the Predator Annihilator does more damage than it, and Predators are hardly famed for being the absolute pinnacle of damage dealing in Warhammer 40k right now. If you're looking for Primaris units, you could also consider the Repulsor Executioner, which does pack a very similar weapon, but also has far more anti-infantry weapons loaded onto the same platform, so it could be another decent option. For anti-infantry duties, the Reaper is going to be competing with things like your basic battle line troops, but for tank-based platforms you could compare it to 2 Razorbacks with twin assault cannons, to 2 Razorbacks with twin assault cannons and Stormbolters. The Reaper's got a bit more damage output, where I'd argue that the Razorbacks have a little bit more durability, plus of a transport capacity which could be useful. In general though, it can be quite helpful to have it in one big unit, if you're using any helpful stratagems or character buffs just for that one. Another decent competitor might be the Redemptor Dreadnought, which is a core unit, which is a very big deal indeed, as it allows it to have rerolls from captains and lieutenants, plus it has decent melee threat as well, while it can pump out a lot of the same firepower with its Onslaught Gatling cannon arrays. Finally, despite being really quite points intensive, the Valiant does hit vehicles very hard, and point for point its damage output is very impressive in my opinion. The higher price tag does mean that it does have a relatively lower durability point for point, though it is going to take some specialist firepower to deal with it. If your opponent doesn't have enough anti-tank themselves, then they're going to struggle. For other reasonably fast close range anti-tank threats, you could think about its points cost in attack bikes or invader ATVs. They have more wounds, are a little bit faster, and are a bit better in close combat, though of course those wounds are only toughness 5 as opposed to toughness 8. In general, the attack bikes deal a little bit more damage, and the Invader ATVs a little bit less, although they do bring 24 toughness 5 wounds to the table. Of course, pretty much all close range anti-tank options are going to be weighed up against Eradicators at the moment, who are ludicrously scary, and point for point these guys will deal more damage than this at the moment, but I think that you could say the same about virtually everything. They are very different platforms though. Infantry and vehicles both have their strengths and weaknesses. The Gladiator does have its advantages in speed and ability to fire when in close combat or fall back and shoot. So overall, I could see the Reaper and the Valiant being decent tools to add to the Space Marine arsenal on the tabletop, though I'm a bit less of a fan of the Lancer. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on the Gladiator tanks down in the comments below. I'm certainly going to be considering adding some of these Primaris Hover Predators to my army. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. We'll certainly have plenty more reviews for the new Space Marine datasheets coming out over the next few weeks, so subscribe or check back later if you'd like to see more. All these videos do take quite a lot of time to make, so if you are enjoying them, and any support with the creation is absolutely massively appreciated. If you're interested in helping support Auspex Tactics, then there's a link to the channel's Patreon page down in the video description below, and if you do fancy keeping the channel going, there's a fair few rewards and perks for doing so. Channel patrons get to see a video early each week, there's regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and you also get entered into the Auspex Tactics prize giveaway, with the chance to win some big kits every single month. If any of that's interesting to you, or if you just fancy saying thank you for the vids, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.